Good afternoon and good evening to all of you, depending on which location of geographical location you are present. So very good morning to Christian. I know you are logging in from Germany, so good morning to you. Good afternoon to
Good
all my
morning from Berlin.
yeah. Good morning, all of my colleagues from India, and good evening for all the colleagues who are joining from other part of the world. There are some people who are joining in the from America also, if I'm not wrong. So yes. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Today we are having a very important speaker who is going to talk about Dr. Gänshirt. If sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Dr. Tistan is an architect. He's a research educator based in Berlin. He's graduated from university in Germany and also studied in Switzerland. He worked with the very renowned architect who we all admire for Alvaro Siza and Jose Paulo de Santos in Oporto, Portugal. Siza is a good friend, and I had been always very much inspired with the way the Siza's work when I was working in Milan. So Tristan has worked with Siza also, and he is registered and licensed architect in Berlin Chamber of Architects since 1996, and he set up his own practice. He was a senior associate professor and master program director at University in Shenzhen, China. He has been a visiting professor at Kassel University and University of Hong Kong. He has a good experience of working in Asian part of the world, also mainly in China and Hong Kong. He also taught at Virginia Tech University in Berlin, Hanover University, and Brandenburg University of Technology. He received his PhD for dissertation on design theory. So today he's going to talk about some of the tools which are very, very essential for design. Christian, to introduce our school, we are a school of architecture. We are comparatively a new school as compared to the older schools in India. We are a school of architecture, Noida International University. Here we have all the students mainly from architecture and interior design. And many of the students who are here they are in the first year of architecture. So I believe that your talk for them is very, very important for them, because these days when we talk about tools for design, the first tools which always comes is that either app or computer or laptop or tablet. So with your intervention about the tools of design, which is very clearly I can see on the cover page also the tools which is hand, not the fingers by computer. So I am looking forward for your innovative ideas about tools for ideas and which translate into a design. So over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Rajendra, for inviting me, for introducing me so kindly. Today, I would like to talk about research I have been doing for 20 years now. Since I started teaching architecture, I was asking myself, what are the tools we have to develop our architectural ideas, and how can we teach them? So I'd like to start with this photograph of a hand holding a compass, which was a photograph Lissitzky did about 100 years ago. And he used it to combine it into a self-portrait of himself as a constructor, as an architect. And this photograph shows us the many levels design activities can have. We have our head, our brain, where we think things, but we also have eyes, and the eyes go through our hands, and our hands hold instruments that allow us to create geometry, but we also use words and letters and tracing paper and so on. So for me, this photograph by Lissitzky for many years was an important inspiration for my research on the question of what is architectural design, how do we do it, and what are the tools we have available for that. When I'm talking about tools, I'm using a metaphor for activities we do during the design process, and especially for the media we use to express our ideas. And my research on design tools comes with the hope of providing us with a well-ordered set of tools, a well-ordered toolbox like this drafting tools ordered about 100 years ago in Munich in Germany. So when we go, for example, to an exhibition of a great architect, this is Renzo Piano, a show he did in Shanghai about 5 years ago. We see so many different things. We see chairs and tables, and on the tables we see photographs and sketches and drawings and scale models and different types of models. On the walls we see texts, and on the tables also we see quotes and leaflets and catalogs. We see also a lot of big photographs hanging from the ceiling, prototypes, models. So it's a big, beautiful circus of very diverse things. And my question is, what are these things? How do we use them? What could we use them? Since I spent some years in the office of Alvaro Cesar, seeing him do architecture was also an important inspiration for my research. And in this talk today, I included some photos of Cesar at work for you to see what his take is about design tools. The book I'm talking about today, the first edition came out in 2007. It was quite well received, and now I was allowed to do a larger re-edition of the book, starting with a new introduction, trying to better explain what the book is about. And then my talk comes in 4 parts. I will talk about the fundamentals of the design process. Then I will introduce research on design tools. And the third part, I will talk about new research that has been published after the first edition of my book came out. So the new edition captures this. And in the third part, I will talk about design practices. So the question of how to choose tools and how to combine tools into a sustainable practice for architecture. Thinking about design, it was an important step forward, understanding that architectural design is a process that can be described in terms of steps we have to take and in terms of things we have to do in each step in order to go forward and achieve a project. And this is kind of an idealized roadmap we need to have in our minds to be able to proceed in our work. And for example, for Cesar, the roadmap is very clear in his mind. It's never on the table, it's just in his mind. And it's also clear that the roadmap might not be always as linear as the idealized version of this is looking like. So this is another way of trying to depict a design process in Germany, which shows how complicated it can get and how different the activities are and also the results. And sometimes you have feedback loops and you have processes in parallel and some end and some continue and so on. So it's maybe much more confusing than helping when we look at these process maps. That's why the thinking of design as a process is not always helpful. But for example, if we use digital processes like parametric design, this in a way allows us even to step out of the process, because we can always go back and start change any step in the process. That's what we cannot do in reality. A different way of thinking about design is, and I'm using a sketch by Cesar to illustrate that, is thinking of design as a creative act. And this is more like the mystery of design, because we don't know what happens when we are creative. We don't know what our brain does when it comes up with a new idea. So, but still we need it to make progress. So we trust that it happens, and it happens again and again and again. And if we get more experienced in that, we also know how to make it happen. But still it's a mystery how it happens. Only brain researchers would be able to explain us to it. So what I'm using to explain design, the creative act as much as the design process, is a structure I call the design cycle. I'm saying that there are 5 steps actually in design that have to be taken all the time and repeated all the time to make progress. We have to think about something, then we have to express our thoughts, and to do that we need tools. We need things that allow us to to bring things out of our mind into physical reality. And then if we have done that, we can look at what we did and we can criticize it, analyze it, and think of it again. So we have two modes of the design cycle, the creative mode and the critical or analytical mode. And both design cycles are essential to do design, and they define the structure of every design process. So it's present in any action we do when we design. And that's important to understand because it's like the secret key to any design activity, being aware of the design cycle as the way of making progress. And now what's obvious is that every step in the design cycle is essential. We cannot do without thinking. We cannot do without expressing our thoughts. We cannot express our thoughts without tools, without media. We cannot see what we think without looking at the tools, and we cannot keep thinking without perception. So these are the essential steps of design, and we need to do them in a creative mode as much as in critical modes. So it's also essential to be clear about creativity and about criticality. And the question, of course, in this design cycle is, these tools that are essential to any design activities, what are they? What is a design tool? And that's my research question for my talk and also for my book. And other questions follow from this question. So how do design tools work? What are they good for and what are they not so good for? When and how were design tools historically developed? And how does the digital turn affect design tools? Because nowadays everybody wants to use computers, and sometimes the question is if it's really always a good idea. If you go a little back in history, about, let's say, 1950s, a table of an architect in Europe, in Helsinki, in the house of Alvar and Aino Aalto, looked about like that. So that's how the tools on the table of an architect, like triangles and rulers and pencils and more stuff for drawing, more triangles, curved shapes, working drawings in different scales, a brush, a telephone, a lamp. That was the table of an architect. And even when I was a student, my table looked quite similar in the 1980s in Germany, or even in Caesar's office at the beginning of the 1990s. Tables looked all similar, so I thought the tables and what's on the tables might not be that interesting. Maybe I should take a step back for my research and look at the things architects produce with their tables. So drawings, sketches, scale models, paintings, then photographs, all these media. And I started to look at these in a more systematic way, trying to understand their centrality for the design tool, for the design cycle, and understanding also the groups we have, because usually architects think what they have to use are visual tools, starting with very basic, very simple gestures, then sketches, drawings, models, perspective views, photographs, films, videos. But in practice, in reality, architects also spend a lot of time talking and using verbal tools for architectural design. So they use words and metaphors to describe their new ideas. They form sentences, descriptions. They criticize what they did or what others did. And this leads to discussions, and these discussions can be, when they have a result, they lead to a theory maybe, and theories can be expressed in algorithms, and algorithms lead to programs. So we have a whole set of verbal tools as well as we have a set of visual design tools. And this is what I would call the design toolbox. When I was a student, everybody said drawing is the tool of the architect. And even when I came to Porto, at the school of Porto, people say drawing is the central tool of what architects have to do. But observing Caesar, I realized, no, it's not just the scale drawing. It's also sketching, it's also model making, it's also talking, describing, criticizing, discussions. It's perspective views, it's photographs, it's theory, it's algorithms, and it's computers, of course. And the computers are a game changer in architectural design because they combine visual and verbal elements in a new tool and on a new physical level, because electronics are different from molecules. So let me now just in a few sentences each tool describe you a little bit how I talk about tools in my research. I'm starting with gestures because this philosopher, Wilhelm Flusser, was an important model for my research by studying gestures in terms of phenomenology. And his studies led to my research on gestures, trying to see that they are like the basis of every design activity. And of course, if you observe Caesar when he's talking and when he's explaining something, gestures are an essential part of it. Nowadays, people even combine gestures and computers with cameras recording gestures in space directly to translate into three-dimensional drawings and those into pieces of furniture. So if you go to the digital level, gestures are an amazing tool you can use. And that's how the book looks, the new edition. Sketches are tools that are incredibly important for someone like Caesar. He is very famous for doing many sketches. But strangely enough, at most architecture schools, we don't even look at them. We don't even discuss them with the students. We expect them to be something in private, and we only show the very best ones. Caesar is using, at the time he was using very simple school books for school children, very cheap, and just ball pens, and he's sketching a lot and almost all the time. So there's hundreds of these sketchbooks filled with sketches. And let me explain you with a sketch I saw him do, how it works and how quickly it can be done and how effective it is. So this is a sketch he did in about 10 minutes, studying a factory building. And he did not like the corner solution here. So he thought about it again and came up with a different solution, which was actually built then. At the same time, he was looking at the interior of the factory. You see this part here. He was also thinking about the structural system of the bridge connecting the factory with another factory. He studied also a detail of an emergency door and some other details. All of this in 10 minutes, quickly done, and 30 years later, we still have it and we can communicate it anywhere. So it's amazing how quickly it can be done, how much it helps us to think quickly about things, come up with solutions as well, and even to keep things conserved for documented for quite a long time. If you go on Google and sketch and Google, for example, Caesar sketches, you find hundreds and thousands of sketches. So because he's using this tool so much. But he's also using language. He's talking a lot, and with clients, with engineers, with builders, with authorities, with his collaborators, and he's writing. So there are beautiful texts where he very concisely explains his thinking about architecture. And this is important also to develop ideas and also to convey ideas. Of course, drawing is something like a central tool, and Caesar very often he does it himself, sitting on a table, studying. That's a famous one of his drawings, but that's only the final solution. So when you look how it developed, you can imagine how we're sitting on a table, looking at the same idea from different angles and putting different perspective views on the sheet, and also facade created. So that's how he produces drawings, and it's not the same what you see in the books later. No, that's the way he does them. It's a bit more messy. Nowadays, most of us use computer drawings, and we call them drawings, but in fact they are something different. They put our work in a very different physical space, allowing for different ways of manipulating things and communicating things. So we should be careful of calling things drawing that in fact they are databases and algorithms. Work in a very different way than physical drawings work. models, they are also quite important. And that was maybe my first surprise to see how important they were in his daily design practice. As soon as a thing becomes a bit more developed, he wants to see it as a model, and he wants to think about it. And then if you Google them, you find lots of his models on the internet. And again, please be careful to understand that many of these models are not made as design tools, for design purposes, but rather to present the final ideas to clients and exhibitions. The ones he used, so the beautiful and sophisticated models, they are done by professional model makers and not by architects. But I'd like to show you this model here, because this is a typical model he used to use for design process in the office, so on his table or made by collaborators. And these models, they look very humble. They are made with very soft and even ugly materials, allowing to change them quickly and allowing to develop ideas very quickly and even easily and simply. So that's a very different type of model. Like the working model, the design tool model looks very different as the presentation model. And it's important to understand that in a more rational way. We can analyze the relation between an original idea or an original building and the model of it. So what are the attributes that are represented in the model? Which attributes are lost, and which ones are brought in by the model? So the relation between model and project is quite complicated and needs to be studied carefully. And this is true for all media we use in architecture. It's true for sketches, for drawings, for descriptions. So each representation of a project is only a partial representation and therefore can be misleading. That's why we need to combine different media to show the full project and to understand the full project. Of course, nowadays we use computers a lot, which is a big step because it moves the space of action from the space of atoms and molecules to the space of electrons. Both are physical, but electrons are much lighter and they can be manipulated to very different rules. So the rules of electrons, they allow for light speed. Because they have very little mass, they can do things atoms and molecules cannot do, which creates a big space of opportunity on the one hand side, but also creates problems because nowadays these electrons are able to simulate reality in a way we cannot distinguish from three-dimensional reality. That's why we no longer are so sure about what is truth, but it's a very powerful tool for design because of that. Calculation is also key. Even in CISA sketchbooks, we find a lot of calculations because calculations allow us to understand many aspects of architecture that cannot be drawn. Yeah, so they allow us to understand the cost. They allow us to understand dimensions, to understand proportions, to understand long-term consequences of design decisions. And it's again important to understand that nowadays the calculations we can do are much more easy and sophisticated than the ones, for example, the generation of Alvar Aalto had. Aalto in the 1950s, he bought the most sophisticated calculation machine available for architects at the time, which was a mechanical object. You manipulate by turning a wheel. So that's the way Aalto could make calculations. And if we compare to our possibilities today, we understand that we do architecture now in a much more information-rich environment, which allows us to do many calculations almost instantly to better understand the consequences of our design decisions. And if we want to achieve sustainability in architecture, we need to become very, very careful in calculating the effects of architecture. Critique, of course, is very important because it gives us the guiding lines of what we should do and what we should not do. So critique is our set of criteria for our decisions, and without decisions there is no design. And critique and discussion, of course, it's always an important element in the work of Caesar. So he spends a lot of time discussing with collaborators, clients, engineers, and so on. So these are the tools that were included in the 2007 edition of my book. Each one described with a long chapter, quite a few images. So that's what I was trying to do at the time. This book had a second German edition in 2011. It had also a Chinese translation in 2011. But now the new edition is expanded a lot for several reasons. One of them is that I felt I needed to talk more about practice on how to work with the design tools. And because I had to work more on practice, I also needed to be more careful about explaining theory as a design tool, because practice and theory also need to be in balance if you want to do architecture. And I had to talk about sustainability and also about the tools that had been researched after my book came out. So theory, to my understanding, is the basis of architecture. Architecture is based on a theoretical understanding of what good buildings are. And this is explained in texts by many authors, starting with Vitruvius, Alberti, until Rimkolas, or the authors of today. And it's only by theory we can decide what is architecture. Because there's a gap between just any building and architecture. And architecture, we should only call those buildings that correspond to the criteria defined by current architectural theory. So in the case of Caesar, there's a lot of theory on his work. So this was my bookshelf with just books on Caesar about 10 years ago. I started collecting them because it started to become redundant and too much. And there's one little book I contributed myself, which is a little book on the swimming pool on the beach of Lessa de Palmeira. So now my question is, what's new in the new edition of Tools for Ideas? So how has it expanded? Most importantly, the practice part. So, but before I explain the practice part, I would like to explain these subchapters here, which are on a research that has been done by others on design tools. My book was the first book published on design tools. So, and many other researchers then picked up the question because it actually implied an important shift from studying design methodology to studying design toolology. So no longer trying to define the methods of design, but rather trying to say, these are the tools that are available and that's what they help us doing. And that's how they work and how they were developed. And the question was picked up by many important researchers producing a lot of big books on design tools I was talking about, and also exhibitions. So just 2 years later, or a year later, even, this exhibition opened in Vienna called The Making of Architecture, showing all the tools from architects' offices, and also going into the offices of famous architects, trying to find out what they use and how they do their architecture. So Bauau with lots of models, but also photographs and other kinds of tools. And they found also some surprising things. So, for example, some architects, they like Lego toys for model making. Other architects say, please include a bed in your exhibition because that's an important tool to us. Because at night when we dream, our brain resolves problems we cannot resolve during the daytime. So it's an important place for our activity. And some French architects even use shotguns to shoot on clay blocks, creating openings that then become the shape of a building. The findings of this exhibition is also published as a catalog. You can find it maybe in your library. It's very interesting to see all these architects acting and using so different things. So also the Bauhaus University in Weimar started a research fellow program on design tools, running for 2 years with about 7 researchers and creating a book and a conference on their understanding which the most important design tools are. Patrick Schumacher published 2 big volumes on theory of digital architecture, and also thinking a lot about the process of design. Other people came up with like big toolkits, which are a little bit less theoretical, but also charming, like question screws and idea sketchers and concept sharpeners, eye openers, hammers of innovations as a toolkit for a master of design in Switzerland. In China, someone found out that carpenters actually have a tool that is between drawings and between craftsman's tools. It's a wooden stick that takes all the measurements they need to create a traditional wood building in southern China. So all the 4 sides of the stick have all the measurements. They don't need any drawings on the construction site. They just use the stick to do their buildings. Other researchers wrote a PhD dissertations on concept as an instrument in architectural design, or on working and thinking tools, or on the relation between science and design, which is quite complicated. This researcher is a landscape architect. He produced a beautiful book of his dissertation on hiking and walking as a method by landscape design. And this architect, Angelika Jäckel, produced a PhD dissertation on gestures in space, trying to better understand how gestures can be used to express and also to analyze spaces. Johannes Hartmann produced a PhD on recurrence and ambiguity as design tools. Big books were produced on the working drawing as the architect's tool, the model as a tool, and the fetish and this modeltopia. So these working drawings, they are impressive. It's impressive to see how architects at work are drawing very differently from the drawings we might find in glossy architecture books. This is one by Jean Prouvé, for example, from his workshops. Others did studies on metaphors and in architecture and urbanism, on architecture photography, on the diagrams of architecture, diagrammatics in architecture. And most surprising, one colleague did a book on collecting as a tool for modern architecture. I found it quite surprising, but also quite convincing. This is, for example, a wall by a famous landscape architect in Zurich, full of objects they collected for the beginning of a big project. So they had their keywords on the wall, and then they started collecting all sorts of drawings, texts, floor plans, books, plans, objects, to create kind of a mental space from which they could draw and develop their ideas. That's something that could be very helpful, for example, in design studio teaching. What is the set of ideas we want to draw from? So looking at all these very different tools, I had to revise my taxonomy. So I found that the media I was talking about have to be complemented, because there's a whole set of different things we also call design tools, or others call design tools. And they are very different. They are like simple, from materials to the media, even to the immaterial, to creativity, thinking, and ethics and aesthetics. So I was trying to map the contents of research to see what's available and what has been researched. And this is also a more developed form of this is included in my book, trying to map the conventional and the tools and the promising tools for special purposes. So now let me talk a little bit about the practice part, because practice, that's the question. What do we actually do? How can we do it? And a big question that came up in the last decades was the question of sustainability. And something I realized is that the conventional tools architects like to use, like drawings, models, sketches, and so on, they don't help much showing the sustainability of a project. So we need to find and we need to develop different tools to be able to do sustainable architecture. And sustainability, that's only achieved if a project is socially sustainable, if it's environmentally or ecologically sustainable, and economically. Only if these three criteria are satisfied, three value systems come together, we talk about sustainable architecture. And that's not easy to do. Obviously, an important way of achieving that is digital design, because digital design helps us to generate and to understand the data we need to understand sustainability. So it's not only about presenting, about CD, it's also about form generation, it's about information, it's about optimization, it's about production and construction, and even use and maintenance of a building needs to be done in digital ways and observed and analyzed and corrected to achieve a sustainable architecture. Same building from the inside, look how beautiful it can be, how amazing. And it's also amazing how the digital tools now change our way of production. So this is a bridge printed of stainless steel in Amsterdam. So that's how far we can go today. Everything can be 3D printed now. Another approach we badly need to come up with better and more sustainable architecture is research-based design, because we need to do research to find out how to do better. And that's nothing that comes by creativity, that comes by knowledge, by research-generated knowledge. An important research project in Portugal about 70 years ago was, 60 years ago, was done by all Portuguese architects on vernacular architecture in Portugal, trying to understand what is Portuguese architecture. And this book produced what became an important base of material and of research for architects like Caesar. So this book, if you go to the book, you find images that are almost very close to some of his projects. So let's say, for example, this way of making an opening or a door to a house is almost identical to the doors you find in some of Caesar's social housing projects. German architect Frei Otto used a very special way of working with models, for example, to do scientific research as much as creative research. Chinese architect Wang Shu, he did a lot of cultural research as well, like theory, trying to understand a network of ideas his work is based on. That's also something you would find in my book. And he produces very interesting and amazing architecture, drawing from these ideas and developing in a very practical as much as theoretical way. Social design, that's maybe the last approach I would like to mention in my talk. Social design is all kind of design activities that are related to the social questions involved in architecture. And as we know, the more people we have, the more difficult it might become to understand each other, to communicate, to develop ideas together. And one of my Berlin architects, who is very much involved in school design, developed a design tool she calls the School Vision Game. So it's a game that allows all people that are involved in a school project, this means teachers, parents, children, authorities, all people involved, to come together and to play games, and games that allow them to formulate the ideas their school should be based on. So having all sorts of activities combined together in spaces, and the spaces related to each other in specific ways, allows them to define the program of a school without too much discussions, without too much conflicts either, because professionals as much as non-professionals sometimes have a hard time navigating these conflicts. And maybe the last way of doing social design I want to show here with young architects from France and from Europe coming together and doing design in a way by going to a site, start living there and start developing a social space and a social construct as much as the building itself. So that's a project they did, for example, in Darmstadt together with Bauau on site, and not only designing things like from the distance, from an office, from a professional office, but living there on site and doing it themselves and creating the building and the social context at the same time. So much for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for inviting me. If you have questions, maybe you can ask them now, or if not, you also can send them to my email here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christian.
How do I continue now? I am.
Yes. Okay. You can you can just cross this presentation on top left, and it will automatically return back to the same screen. Okay.
I close it. I close the presentation.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Christian. It was such a wonderful listening you. I mean, I felt a little bit nostalgic about your initial few presentation slides. You spoke about Renzo Piano's exhibition. I remember when I was in Milan, I attended the exhibition of piano in Triennale Museum. I mean, actually, it was the similar kind of exhibition which happened in Shanghai. So I really felt it very nostalgic seeing some of your slide. And you also talked about Caesar. I mean, Caesar, what a dear architect he is. I mean, I remember that, when we were studying in Europe, the one architect who always every student want to look up to, I mean, it was Caesar. The museum, the swimming pool which you talked about, I have personally been there. I mean, it's such a wonderful project it is. I mean, the line of, the furniture design, even the wooden work and everything is masterpiece. That's why Caesar is a master. You talked about very importantly about the importance of sketches, which you can see. This is the sketch of Sautomora, another master from Caesar office. These you can see the sketches. I believe that Caesar and Sautomora, they are almost the same line. Sautomora is an extension of Caesar. I'm very much touched the way you have presented it. I'm very sure that many of the students, they also might have really realized the importance of the design thinking. Also talk very importantly, a very important point about the use of model. I mean, when we talk about model, I mean, the Franco Gehry, though you have not mentioned in your slides, but, the Gehrys start designing the building with the model. I mean, the drawings come later, the models come first. So that is another way of thought. And one of the very important slide which I really felt very touched about your importance of the tools for a student. I remember one of my recent visits to Harvard University in Graduate School of Design. I don't know if you have been to GSD, Harvard. Have you been to Harvard School of Design?
No, I've not.
So it is a very, very, very important. I mean, the student can Google about it. A drafting table becomes their kind of a house. I mean, it's like they have all the tools and tools and all those things. So the Harvard Graduate School of Design is designed for a student thinking that they will have a lot of requirement of tool storage. Now that those tools have taken over by computers, by laptops, by so-called app and all those things, but the importance of these hand tools and the models and all, these are very, very important. You talked a very important point about architecture by gesture. I don't know if you have if you had experience of working in Milan, I mean, Milan of Italy, you know, Italy is a culture. I believe that you know. I mean, whatever your experience, the expressions by architects, by whether Vittorio Gregotti or Renzo Piano and all, the gestures by hand is very, very important. And you know, this language of gesture, it came in me also during some of time in Italy. So gesture is very important. But one thing is very, very important, which is also challenging. Also, you very slightly you speak about some of the architects' name, like a Koolhaas, or for that matter, Patrick Schumacher. Patrick Schumacher could be extension of Zaha Hadid. These kind of architecture where it is becoming also symbolic architecture or signature architecture. I believe that is another tool which is designed these days. You know, the symbolism designed by Koolhaas, designed by Hadid, late Hadid, or designed by Gehry, and all those things. Before I throw the question to students about their understanding about about the content of your lecture, but I would also like to have your point of view about this new dimension in design. The dimension is symbolism or signature style of architecture. So what is your say about it before I open for students for the question?
It's a big trend but I would say not so much in architecture, but more in media, because these architects become so important because it's so medialized, and it's because media needs to focus attention, so it's just for a few stars and not for the broad need for decent building for many people. So it's what we call the star system, and it's a tendency that's rather produced by media than needed in reality, I would say.
Okay, I do agree with you, fully agree with you. I believe that, I mean, since you mentioned the term about archi-star, I mean, yes, this archi-star is a trend, I mean, especially coined by media, I mean, architecture media, to be more specific. But again, the signals are good. I mean, if you see the recent Pritzker laureate, this couple from France, I believe that we are also realizing about our roots. We are realizing about our sensitivity toward architecture. And I remember once I had an interaction with the very renowned architect from Milan, I mean from Italy, called Massimiliano Fuxas. And then we were discussing about this architecture style thing. And, you know, when you talk about Gehry's building, Franco Gehry, I mean, it is after the Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao, every client, everybody want to have a similar kind of a Bilbao effect by Gehry. Buildings like maybe, let's say, Sweden, I mean, the Malmo Turning Tower by Santiago Calatrava. Every second tall buildings are having some twist in the tower. I mean, it is we can call it a Malmo effect. So yes, I mean, whatever is it becomes successful in the market or per se in the media, is always a trend for repeating the same. I mean, of course, it is not a good sign, but yeah, it is happening. And thanks to the media, and now the media, I mean, online media is very, very easy to access. I mean, gone are the days for any suggestions or any design ideas, you need to refer the library. Here, everything you can get a click by mobile in a matter of a few seconds. So yes, I do agree with you that media is responsible for this trend. I will open up some question by some student also. Any student would like to raise some question Archit, can you please moderate some question? If there is no question, you can also propose question from yourself. Archit, over to you.
Sure, sure.
Any question by any student, please. You can type questions in the chat box also, students.
We'll be taking up some questions from students, especially with the final year students. If you want to ask anything about your ongoing thesis projects.
So I would like to ask something.
Mike, yeah,
Yes,
Mike, please go.
Yes. Yes. Hi, Sir Christian. The presentation was a very insightful one and also a very motivational one, if I may say. So my first question to you would be like you've spoken about modeling being a very important factor in the design process. Like I wanted to know what are your thoughts on the new technology which resides with the computing process also, which you have spoken about, right? So if we merge both of these, like nowadays there are these 3D printing machines which help us to print out models. So I just wanted to know what's your stance on this, and like if we should really be gravitating towards 3D printing for architecture.
Obviously, these technologies are very promising. So there's the hope to make architecture more sustainable by using these tools, to have it to find better ways of doing architecture, to better ways of generating information and analyzing information. So there are big promises in a digital way of doing architecture, but it also, because it's such a powerful way, it also comes with big challenges. So for many architects, these tools become very expensive, for example, to use. And also these tools become so powerful that sometimes it's not so clear if the tools are the ones in power or the architect is the one in power. So it's important tools and promising tools, but also challenging tools. That's how I would understand them. And it's important nowadays to understand that the traditional tools have qualities we should not forget. For example, 3D printing is an important way of learning how to produce 3D printings and how to work with a digital production process. That's very important. But physical models made by hand are also very important because they allow us to work with different materials, to learn how to combine them, to feel them, to learn about construction, and they convey many informations a printed model would not be able to convey. So we should not forget about those. They have qualities we cannot neglect in architecture.
Can I just attend this? Archit, I would also like to answer my observation about this to the question of this student. You know, I always tell you, when I was studying architecture 20 years back, that time for us the architecture, for us the technological tool per se about architecture presentation was AutoCAD. Okay, AutoCAD was like it just came now. Now our faculties or our teacher used to say that, okay, if you do with the by hand, you will feel now the software like, for example, ArchiCAD or the software Revit and all, where what happened is that you draw a single line. I mean, you draw a one drawing, let's say plan, elevation, plan or 3D, everything visually elevation. You plan, the section automatically comes. But comparing with this Revit software, if you compare with AutoCAD, in AutoCAD, you draw plan, all the lines in, but all the lines in the plan you draw yourself, all the line in elevation you draw yourself, all the lines in the section you draw yourself, everything you draw yourself. Now I start saying my student that no, don't design in Revit software, try to design in AutoCAD. Because when you are designing in AutoCAD, every line, whether it's a plan or whether it's an elevation or whether it's a section, you are drawing feeling by your hand. So how do I connect that things with the student question about model? I believe that please understand whether any deliverable you are getting, whether it's a drawing or whether anything, this is not coming from your hand. You feel like that. For example, when you are drawing a model, okay, this is a will become this, because these things are going through with your hand. So any of the design process of be it model or be it drawing or be it outcome which is coming in front of you. So whether 3D model is very good. Please understand the 3D model is this touch and mind expression. It may miss. So any drawing, I always prefer, as you might have seen in working with me, a student and my colleague, I always say that anything which is whether coming drawing or whether coming print, and because when you are using with tools and mind, it's there. When you are using this mouse and computer, that connection of mind, and it's not there. So I believe that 3D model may come very sophisticated, everything is there, but till that time, the final product which is not touched by you, it may miss the link. I believe that. So that is my stand on it. So yeah, Archit, over to you.
Yes, yes, sir. So finally, a student asks, how can they improve their presentation for their thesis sheets? So they want to understand what is right now the benchmarks for presentation globally, which is accepted for maybe a thesis or a final portfolio presentation. Over to you, sir.
Christian, you would like to comment?
That's a very general question. It's difficult to answer in a few words about that. If you want to see benchmarks, or if you want to see what's possible, obviously you can go on the internet and Google and see what kind of presentations people can do, what kind of things they can do, and or see people's portfolio to understand what's possible, or compare what you do with the works of students of other architecture schools. That's the way you can find out about benchmarks, probably.
Okay, sir. Another final year student asks. Yes, please.
Christian, no, sorry, Archit, I would also like to just comment on this question of this student. Well, please understand one thing. As Christian has very rightly said, that it's very generic question. You can always Google, and you can always do the go to and check some of the latest drawings. But please try to understand one thing is very, very important. I'm talking as a jury member also. When I go for a jury to different school, and I always say that many times the best drawing with the very good sketches, very good 3D view and all those things, they may not be able to convince the jury how a very, if I may use the word, a moderate drawing or so okay drawing can impress the jury. It's not important about a design presentation. It's always important that whatever it is there in the drawing, it is, and you can understand very well or not. I give you a very small example. I was in one of the jury in one of the very renowned school in India. Very renowned school. I will not quote the name of the school, but it was very interesting. Everything, the project was a hotel design, the very good drawings, everything, all the details were very clearly marked and all. It was very nice. And when I started asking some of the questions, she could not understand. I mean, she could not understand the questions. Forget about giving the answer. But I said that those answers are already there in your drawing. If the drawings are made by you, you know the answer. The question which I am asking, it is there in the drawing. So I could realize that that drawing was not made by her. She could copy the drawing by somewhere else and all. But how do I prove it? Because the drawing is already there. She may easily say that, no, I mean, I did not remember. Luckily, I saw a drawing. In the drawing, it was written, otra propiedad. Otra propiedad in Spanish, it means other's property. So I could make out that this drawing is actually some Spanish hotel drawing, because I understand a bit of Spanish language. So I understood that it's written otra propiedad, that means some Spanish hotel drawing. And I could make out that no, this drawing is not made by you. It's made by somebody else, and which you have just printed it. So answering the question to that student is about the drawing and referring to Google. You always please try to understand that you can refer anything anywhere in the world, but those works should be yours. I always tell my student that it's absolutely okay to do a mistake in the drawing. It's absolutely okay, because you are a student and you will do a mistake. I mean, we as a professional, we also do a mistake. The moment when the drawing is 100% perfect, and I'm saying, when I see the drawing 100% perfect, then there is an alarm. That no, I mean, when I'm seeing the drawing of a student, I assume that there might be some mistake, or there might be some kind of the point where there is a mistake or the loopholes. But when you see 100% perfect drawing, then the suspicions start happening that these are taken from Google or taken from somewhere else. Please, whatever you get inspired from any external resources is absolutely okay, but you should have 100% understanding that what is there on the drawing. Otherwise it's alarming. So Archit, any other questions?
Yes, a final year student also asks that what are the basic sustainable design methods which should be followed or should be included in every design right now? Whatever we are designing, especially building in spaces, what will be those basic design sustainable measures which one would follow or keep in mind while designing?
Oh, that's actually quite a complex thing, sustainability, So, for example, how do you evaluate the ecological sustainability of a project? So where do you get the data to understand the carbon footprint, how to understand the energy need for a building, for a construction, for running the building, also the ecological impact of the materials you're using. So that's nothing easy to do. So just the ecological part we call green building already takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills you need to study. So it's almost like an extra project. Same for the question of social quality of architecture. So how do you understand the social impact of a building? Again, this needs to be studied, and only by doing research and by comparing and by seeing best practices you can achieve that. And the economical question, of course, it's a big question. What's the building cost? What is the maintenance cost? What is the cost of running a building? So it's a lot to know, a lot to research, and a lot of knowledge to include into a project.
Absolutely, sir.
And you need a lot of data to understand the level of sustainability your project achieves. Yeah. There are a series of systems now on the market how you can measure it, yeah, and you should work with them to see what you're doing. Don't expect it to be easy. It's a very complex question. In fact, it's 3 value systems that are in competition with the traditional values of architecture. So traditionally, architecture should be standing, so strong, it should be useful, it should be beautiful, and also it should be innovative. So these are the traditional values of architecture. But now we have 3 additional systems, which is the social question, the economic question, and the ecological questions on top of that. So now we have like 7 value systems, and we need to find ways to navigate between those and to come up with solutions that are satisfactory on all these levels. That's nothing easy to do. That's why data are so important for us nowadays. And they are only now available. Like 2 generations before, architects had not these data available. They could not find these data. Now we can.
Christian, this is my personal questions for you. You've widely traveled and you have also very deep understanding about our tradition of architecture, working with the tools and you also have a very great knowledge of present practice of architecture, how the practice has changed also. What do you think about that in today's architecture scenarios? Who could be, if I may ask the question, who is your favorite architect, let's say? Caesar, of course, Caesar is one, no doubt about it. Caesar is our favorite, is evergreen. But who do you think that he's one of the architects who is making a global impact also without compromising of, ethos of architecture?
In general, I'm not so fond of mainstream architects. So, because I think mainstream architecture is rather responsible for the issues we are facing and not really solving them. So, mainstream architecture is the architecture that adds to the problems of climate change. And there are not so many architects who try to confront these issues. There are not so many architects who really struggle for sustainable architecture, who fight for that, who try to do something totally different. I was very impressed in China by an architecture practice called Amateur Architecture Studio, founded in Hangzhou by Wang Shu and his wife Lu Wenyu. And it was surprising to see that even in a country like China, where so many like big professional practices are very successful and dominating the market, someone can come up with a totally different idea, thinking about the cultural value of architecture, but also thinking deeply about tradition but also about sustainability, and can produce solutions, and these solutions are accepted and realized. So if you ask about an architecture I'm really fascinated by is these architects, Amateur Architecture Studio in Hangzhou. You might have heard of them.
Yeah, Wang Shu is, I believe, a few years back, he also received a Pritzker Prize also. So yeah,
Yes,
he's definitely one of the good architects. In my also list, you have an architect like Peter Zumthor. Such a wonderful architect. He's relevant in today's practice also. And for that matter, the Caesar's work, the project of what he is designing a skyscraper in New York, the one which he is designing as of now at this stage, is actually a very interesting project.
Definitely, yes.
Has a host of architecture today. I believe these are some of the questions. We also have, any other questions do we have? There is a question by one student that where we can get a book. Yes, I believe that there is a PDF of the book. You can write me. I will forward it. The book of Christian. Christian, if you want, you can write your email ID in this chat box. So any student would like to connect with you.
Yes, sure.
Would you like?
It's on my email is on the last slide.
Box.
The last slide of the
So
presentation shows my email address. So everyone can write me.
Okay. Archit, you please make sure that those presentation, please should go to everyone, to the student and the thing.
Sure, sir.
So with this way, we'll conclude the presentation. Thank you so much to all the students who were present. I mean, I know that it's a very crisis time in present days, especially this part of the world. Thank you so much to my all faculties, Archit, Sheena, Anju, Pranshu, and all those faculty who joined, who have been here with us throughout the lecture. It was such a very, very useful presentation, though, I mean, the world is changing very rapidly with a lot of technology, but the essence of architecture will always remain same. We will always write by pen, we will always write by equipment, we'll always have our mind and sensory will always play an important role. Whether it becomes pen or it becomes computer, it will be controlled by here. So I always have that liking of technology, at the same time also liking of pen. Both are equally important. And the presentation of today is by Christian. It's really a very thought-provoking that a professional like Christian is always very, very useful for pulling us back, that whenever if we are moving in a wrong direction, so a professional like Christian or his writing always bring back to us and give the right direction. So thank you so much, Christian, for such a useful presentation. And it is a recorded, so we'll also put it on YouTube also for view to all the other colleagues across the world. Thank you so much to you, Christian.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I wish you safe and healthy. My all wishes to you and your family. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All the best for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Archit, we can go now.